Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Book of Enoch. Now, when you hear Book of Enoch, you say, wait a minute, I don't recall that as being part of the Bible. And I want to say that it's not. There's actually multiple editions of this Book of Enoch. It was an early Jewish writing. When I say early, I'm speaking about the time before the coming of Jesus. The Ethiopic Church still uses the Book of Enoch, as well as a number of other books. Perhaps you're familiar with the idea that Protestants have 66 books in their Bible. The Roman Catholics have a few more, those books that they refer to collectively as either the Apocrypha or the Deuterocanonical books. But then the Ethiopic Church actually has even more than the Roman Catholic Church, and the Book of Enoch is one of those. Now, multiple copies, were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. When you see that term DSS, that's shorthand for Dead Sea Scrolls. In K4 that you're looking at here in the photo, there were 11 Aramaic and 3 Hebrew copies, all in just tiny fragments. So there was no one complete copy, not even one complete page. They were all small fragments. All date to the early Qumran period, that is the period of the Qumran community before the birth of Jesus. Fragments also, I should mention, of the Book of Giants. Now, the Book of Giants is a book that sort of parallels the Book of Enoch, tells similar stories, and perhaps some other time we'll go through the Book of Giants. And you say, well, what are the giants about? You will remember that in Genesis chapter 6, there's a reference to the Hebrew term uses the Nephilim, and the New American Standard actually takes that word, and instead of translating it, they're not sure what to do with it. Literally, it means the fallen ones. And the Septuagint had translated that word giants. There were giants in the land or in the earth in those days. And so somebody came along and wrote a bunch of neat stories about those giants, and that made it into this Book of Giants. Now, we don't have a complete copy of the Book of Giants. We've only got fragments. And like I said, the stories are going to be paralleled in this Book of Enoch. Only the Ethiopic copies of the Book of Enoch are complete. As I said, we found portions, little tiny scraps in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which tells us that the Ethiopic copies, even though they are dated to a much later period, the copies that they have in Ethiopia are only from the last several hundred years. But they evidently were passed on much earlier. And portions seem to have been written prior to the Maccabean period. And so we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have scrolls that go back to before the time of the Maccabees. Time of the Maccabees, that's around 160 BC. There's portions of the Book of Enoch that are earlier than that. Now, is the entire Book of Enoch earlier than that? I can't really say. Does it date back to actually Enoch himself? Very few scholars believe that to be the case, and I don't believe it to be the case either. However, it's quoted in Jude chapter 1 and verse 6, and we'll look at that quote in just a moment. Now, the theology of the Book of Enoch. It's not a small book like the Book of Jude is. It's actually quite a lengthy book, and it's laying out these stories that are supposed to tell you about all the things that happened to Enoch and his father and grandfather, Lamech and Methuselah, and it's all sorts of stories that are supposed to be taking place before the flood. Very imaginative. And the theology of Enoch is such that it talks about how sin was brought by fallen angels who came to have sex with human women. The women were very good looking, and apparently there were a shortage of women among the angels, and so the angels went and procreated with those women. It also talks about the Second Temple sacrifices. You say, well, what does that have to do with Enoch? Well, they make a connection there, and about how those Second Temple sacrifices are impure because they're worshiping and following the wrong rituals and using the wrong priests. And you must remember that the group at Qumran was a sort of a resistance and complaint group against the worship in the temple. And not that they didn't like the temple, but they didn't like the way they thought the worship there and the leaders of the temple had turned out. And so they had moved away from the temple, had moved down to the edge of the Dead Sea, and wanted nothing to do with the temple worship, which they thought was impure. The solar calendar versus the lunar calendar. We'll actually see one of the books that's actually two of the books are going to discuss that. When I say two of the books of Enoch. We're going to divide it into books. Maybe you might want to call them chapters, but it also has chapter divisions as well. And there's also going to be very clear reference to life after death and a final judgment. These will be regular and ongoing themes that are found in the Book of Enoch. So the book begins, and we're not going to go through all of that. Certainly, you can download the Ethiopic version of the Book of Enoch. And remember, that's the only version that we have the complete text of. Those scraps that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls let us know that that text has substantially changed over the years. And yet the book is still recognizable, so that it begins the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. You get down to verse 9 of that first chapter, and behold, he, and this is speaking of the Lord, he comes with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, and to destroy all the ungodly, and to convict all flesh of all the works of their ungodliness, which they have ungodly committed, and of all the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Now, if those words sound familiar to you, they should, because they are echoed in the book of Jude, the second to the last book of our New Testament. Here's the book of Jude. It was about these men that Enoch, in the seventh generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, and here's this substantially the same quote: "Behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their ungodly deeds, which they have done in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Close to word for word. Certainly close enough, as I like to say, for government work. Now, both of those are drawing from Deuteronomy chapter 33, where I see at least a portion of that echoed in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses is speaking. He says, "The Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran." And here it is. "And he came from the midst of 10,000 holy ones." Remember that reference in both Jude and in Enoch. "At his right hand there was flashing light for them." And so at least that phrase seems to be drawn from Deuteronomy. Now, we also have the Epistle of Barnabas, which is a non-canonical book, a book written, I really don't think Barnabas wrote it, but it's a book written in the 2nd century, and it has that title, the Epistle of Barnabas. It says, "The final stumbling block or source of danger approaches, concerning which it is written, as Enoch says," and now he quotes Enoch, "For this the end of the Lord has cut short the times and the days, that his beloved may hasten, and he will come to the inheritance." And so notice the Epistle of Barnabas in the New Testament era, as well as Jude, are quoting from the Book of Enoch. So let's look at this book. Now, I only put half of the book here, and then we'll see another slide. Couldn't fit it all into one slide, so it's going to be a lot more than 82 chapters. But I've divided it up into roughly 7 books. The first is the Book of Watchers. It begins with a brief introduction, and then you read about the fall of angels and how their falling was to go and take human wives, and the sons of this union were giants. Now, that's one of the common interpretations of Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, that speak about the sons of God, and they come and meet daughters of men. And one of the interpretations says that those sons of God are angels. Well, evidently, whoever's writing the Book of Enoch endorses that that interpretation. And that the sons of these offsprings are giants. Now, it tells you how high the giants are. They're not like little giants. They're not giants like, 8 or 10 feet tall, but they are like giants, skyscraper style giants. And then Enoch goes to heaven to intercede on behalf of these fallen angels, also known as watchers. And while he is there, Enoch goes on a tour of heaven, and this all takes place in chapters 1 through 36, the first book of Enoch, the subtitle, the Book of Watchers. Next, we have the Book of Parables, and Enoch sees the future of the righteous and the wicked. The righteous are going to have eternal life, and everything's wonderful, and the wicked are going to be judged, and everything's not so wonderful for them. And the Messiah is the one who brings judgment. Now, there are references in the Old Testament to Messiah, but it's not something about which you read a lot, at least not using that term. There are a few times where it speaks, for example, in Daniel chapter 9, of Messiah the Prince. In other words, the word Messiah just means the anointed one. But here in the book of Enoch, there is a great deal more mentioning of Messiah as this one who is coming to bring judgment. And so we begin to see a very clear messianic expectation. There's also a reference to a 364-day calendar, which will be further explained in the next book. The next book is the Book of Heavenly Luminaries. That is, by luminaries, the sun, the moon, the stars, things like that. And Enoch is taken to heaven by the angel Uriel. Don't let that throw you. We're going to see a bunch of angels' names in the Book of Enoch. They're not taking most of those from the Bible. Rather, these are Jewish traditions. It sort of reminds you of what you read about in what Paul says in the book of Colossians about how people get all swept up in all these mythologies and stories about angels. And it might be that Paul is actually referencing books like the Book of Enoch when he speaks against such a thing. And so in the book of Heavenly Luminaries, there are laws for the sun and the moon that are established, that they're to go, at this time and this season. And that's all designed by God. And names are given to various parts of the year, not the months that you might be familiar with, but other names and other segments of years. And a justification is now set forth for the 364-day calendar, in contrast to a calendar of 360 days or 365 days. Now the writer of Enoch knows about both of those ways of doing a calendar. And he says, godly people don't do that way. They do it this way. And so anybody who does it the other way, they're rejected, and shame on them. And of course, again, what he's doing, he's talking about the temple and the form of the calendar that's being used by the Jewish people in the temple. Next, we have the Book of Dreams, and here Enoch, he talks about Enoch's dreams that when he's just very young, he has a series of dreams, and in his dream, he prays for deliverance from the flood and is given in answer a vision of all of history, beginning with Adam, going through his time, and then on through Moses and Joshua and pretty much the entire Old Testament, all the way up to Messiah. Now, there's no New Testament because, remember, that hadn't been written yet, that hadn't taken place yet. But again, that messianic expectation is seen very clearly. In chapters 91 through 105, we have an Epistle of Enoch. It's given to Methuselah, and all of history is laid out in a series of 10 weeks. That is, the weeks are representative. Reminds you a little bit of Daniel chapter 9 that talk about the 70 weeks that are set forth. Well, this is perhaps where Enoch is getting his ideas from. And there are warnings to the unrighteous, and a day of judgment is coming. The sixth book, Noah's story, it talks about the birth of Noah, and when he is first born, his father Lamech goes and looks at him and says, "Wait a minute, he doesn't look like me. His hair is all white, and his skin seems to be glowing. He looks like those sons of God that are in heaven. Maybe my wife was, doing something with them instead of with me. And so he goes to his father Methuselah, and he asks about that. And Methuselah says, "No, that's all right. Noah is your child." Even though he happens to look rather differently. And then he is given a prophecy of the coming flood. And finally, the final book is just one chapter, chapter 107. There is a vision of hell, and God blesses the righteous with light, and sinners are led away into the darkness, and so the book comes to a close. Now, here's some segments that I want to look at. This is in chapter 40, where the book of Enoch says, "And after that I saw thousands of thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. I saw a multitude beyond number and reckoning who stood before the Lord of spirits. And on the four sides of the Lord of spirits I saw four presences, different from those that sleep not. And I learned their names, for the angel that went with me made known to me their names and showed me all the hidden things. After that, I asked the angel of peace who went with me, and remember, he's got Uriel is accompanying him, who showed me everything that's hidden. Who are these four presences that I've seen, and whose words I've heard and written down? And their names are given as Michael and Raphael and Gabriel. Now, Michael and Gabriel are mentioned in the Old Testament. Raphael, not so much. Phanuel is a familiar name, but not for an angel. And so notice we're going to see other angels with other names. And this is going beyond what the Bible teaches. Now notice this phrase, the Son of Man, and there I saw one who had a head of days, and his head was white like wool. Now he's borrowing this from Daniel chapter 7. And with him was another being whose countenance had the appearance of a man, and his face was full of graciousness like one of the holy angels. And I asked the angel who went with me and showed me all the hidden things concerning that, notice how he's called the Son of Man, who he was and whence he was and why he went with the head of days. So you've got head of days, and then you have the Son of Man, two different entities. Again, it reminds you of what you've read about in Daniel chapter 7. And he answered and said unto me, This is the Son of Man who hath righteousness, with whom dwells righteousness, and who reveals all the treasures of that which is hidden, because the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and whose lot has the preeminence before the Lord of spirits in uprightness forever. You see, when Jesus comes on the scene, describing himself as the Son of Man, that's something that the Jewish people had heard, and he's identifying himself with a phrase that they recognize, so that he's communicating his mission and his purpose and even his person very clearly. He goes on, and at that hour the Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits, and his name before the head of days. Yea, before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of the heaven were made, his name was named before the Lord of spirits. This one who's the Son of Man, who pre-existed all creation. And Jesus says, I am the Son of Man. He shall be a staff to the righteous, whereon to stay themselves and not fall. He shall be the light of the Gentiles and the hope of those who are troubled of heart. All who dwell on earth shall fall down and worship before him. One who is going to be worshiped and will praise and bless and celebrate with song the Lord of spirits. The stage had been set, and Jesus comes on the scene saying, I am that one that Isaiah spoke of. And of course, Enoch echoes those words here, the light of the Gentiles. I am the Son of Man who came to give my life for all mankind.